There's another big question, and I guess it's to do with the economy and maybe some of the things that will alleviate, the situation a little bit better, and it's about oil and how we are buying that oil, and it's government to government, G to G. Sam G is the man who's followed the G to G. I think more than anyone else in this newsroom, Sam G has followed the G to G, like is what's happening. Have you seen the court case? Have you seen this? Have you seen this? This is what it is. So you're the right man, Sam G, to tell us about this G to G. So how does this work? We are buying, our government is talking to another government and we're buying oil. What's this arrangement like? I know you've done the story, but take us through it.
Okay. I'm no authority, but at least I've been able to follow the story. And
you have a G in your name.
Some of the insights.
that's
and I think the better place to start is what really happened, because we know that, of course, the administration of William Ruto came into office on the 13th of September last year. But then towards the end of last year, conversations began between the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum Development and stakeholders. And we know that on the 19th of January 2023, there was a Gazette notice that gave out the legal notice number 3. I just want us to take a look at what exactly happened, because the legal notice sort of introduced the new regulations on petroleum importation. And the first one is that the importation of petroleum products under this regulation shall be through the open tendering system.
Yeah.
The open tendering system was the regime that had been in force since 2015, where different oil marketing companies would come together. They apply to, they bid to supply the commodity to the rest of the economy. Whoever wins gets the opportunity to bring that oil to the country and sell to the other OMCs, meaning oil marketing companies. But then also there is a clause that was introduced, that is regulation number 4, sub-regulation 3, that talks about the importation of petroleum products under these regulations through a government-to-government arrangement shall be deemed to have occurred through the open tendering system. So, of course, there was that communication that there's an agreement between the government of Kenya, the government of Saudi Arabia, the government of United Arab Emirates, but now it was woven into the regulations to ensure that if that is used as the deal, then it will be deemed to be an open tender system, and therefore that means that it is acceptable on that front. But then on the 19th of January, that's when we got the legal notice number 3 of 2023, and the notice now established the new petroleum importation regulations and repealed the previous regulations. Then after that, there was a deal that was signed, like I said, between the government and other governments on the 1st of March, heralding the change, or rather, should I say, the dual policy, as it was put by the EPRA Director General, one Daniel Kipto. Then after that, what happened is that on the 3rd of March, something interesting happened, that bids had been invited. They were closed on that day, and it was communicated that in 2 days' time, the successful bidders would be informed. But now, that should have been on the 5th of March, but then on the 16th of March, which was almost 2 weeks later, the Energy Ministry wrote to 3 OMCs. We're talking about the Gulf Energy, we're talking about Galana and Oryx Energy, but also they were informed that they had been successful. They had been nominated by some 3 private companies, or rather 3 international oil companies, one of them in Saudi Arabia, that is Saudi Aramco, then 2 of them in the UAE, one of them in Abu Dhabi, the other one, of course, Big Emirates National Oil Company. So that brings the confusion that you're talking about, because you say that it's government to government, but you have a company here identifying a private company in Kenya to bring oil. But then again, the government of Kenya is giving a lot of credit to these companies so that they're in a position to procure the oil, but pay after 6 months. But the president said that he'll be paying in Kenya shilling, partly yes, partly not factual, because yes, the other oil marketing companies will buy oil from these 3 OMCs
in Kenya shilling.
In Kenya shilling. But the 3 OMCs will pay their suppliers in Saudi Arabia and UAE in dollar, only that will be done in October for the oil that has been delivered today. Yes,
6 months from today. Let's listen to the president on that. In fact, on that very issue of how we are purchasing it and, what currency we're using.
Today, as a country, we can buy fuel in Kenya shillings, something that many people never thought it would be possible. From this month of April, all our fuel marketers and all the people in that space, they will be able to buy our products, fuel products, in Kenya shillings. And it will remove pressure on our dollars.
Indeed, and it's also the promise from the government that this would also lower the cost of the fuel, right? Because we're, not buying it every month, we're buying it in 6 months, and that pressure of the dollar is then reduced. But Linus, there are questions with this deal, how it is being done, and there are some people who are perhaps, questioning the methodology and the communication around it.
And most questions are coming from the oil marketers, the OMCs, who already have gone to court to challenge how the three were picked. And is it actually three or it's Oryx, Galana, and
Gulf.
And Gulf. There are three that were picked. And I think I saw the IPRA CEO explaining yesterday that, they were picked by Saudi Aramco, the Emirates, and then the Abu Dhabi companies, the three. That's Enoch, ADNOC, and also Saudi Aramco. There's a lot of wait and see. This is an experiment, and I actually think even the government is conducting this as an experiment to see how it works, because there are a number of things that are variable. First of all, we are investing in hope, literally, that in 9 months, or actually in 6 months, plus another 3, that's 9 months, that we can bring down the dollar. The exchange rate should come down, and you saw the president talking of between 115 and 120, down from the current 136.
Yeah, we can actually.
We have that.
Yes.
We have that bite.
Yeah. In fact, in the next month or so.
In fact, in the next 1 month or so, you will see dollars coming down, the exchange rate coming down in a very phenomenal way. In fact, in my estimation, in the next couple of months, the exchange rate will come below 120 shillings. Maybe 115, you never know.
Yes, he had there very.
You never know.
You never know. It's a very important disclaimer. You never know, because there are so many other variables. Because when it comes to petrodollars, they call it petrodollars. That is the currency with which oil is bought globally, whether you are Kenya or even another country that is of lower economic capability than us. It's still dollars. And there is a little bit of an inaccuracy when we talk of buying oil in dollars. I think you explained it quite well, that you buy it in shillings and then convert that to dollars after
the 6 months.
After the 180 days, which is about 6 months, which means, which brings in now the issue of the exchange rate. That the president hopes that from 136 currently, we can bring that to 120 or even 115, meaning then that we will pay for much less than we are going to pay for right now. So there's a huge element of hope and the unknown when it comes to this oil question.
And Yvonne, sorry, someone was asking, so what happens after the expiry of that 6 month, the contracts now that they've been given, because payments are due in September? The government says they look at how the dollar crisis is, and if it's been eased, and then it will prevent the shilling from sliding further in the next 6 months, then Kenya will go back to what we have now, which is the open tender system. And that is what the oil marketers want. When they go back, they went to court, because they're saying they're questioning this tender of government to government, and in the court documents, they say this tender of government to government is a scheme that has been initiated by the Cabinet Secretary for Energy to monopolize the petroleum industry at the expense of the oil marketers. That's what they're saying. They're saying, how were these companies picked, and how did they pick the Kenyan companies that are going to supply oil on their behalf? And that's exactly what they're asking. I think do we have a soundbite on this now that we can listen to? Which one now?
Yeah, we can find it. Yes, as you explained to us.
Yeah, as I explained to you. Yeah, so that's the thing. So they've gone to court and saying, well, how did they pick? And then why are they locking us out?
Yeah.
And we look at the companies that have been mentioned. I was looking through at who owns them, who are the local companies that were handpicked to receive the oil, because the word here is handpicked. Yeah. That's been used by the OMCs. Yeah. If you say that they were picked by those foreign companies, what criteria was used to pick them? And why wasn't it an open tender where all the OMCs would have a chance to bid for this? Because what does this do to their businesses for the next 6 months, Yvonne? And I was asking an economist, does this mean that the prices of petrol will go down? They said not necessarily, even if the current arrangement continues. So there are a lot of questions about this deal and what it means. And that thing I was telling you about, Yvonne, shrouded in mystery, no communication, because we found out about it, what, a day or 2 or 3 before the oil was, the petrol was supposed to come into the country. So there's that whole thing of the question about what is really in this. Yeah.
Let's listen to that soundbite now that you were looking for. Yeah.
I want to also acknowledge the oil marketing companies who have been very supportive in this transaction. Whereas we do hear sometimes 1 or 2 complaints there, we do appreciate that today the oil marketing companies are not looking for dollars because the pressure has already eased. When we came into government in September, and even before we were sworn in, some of the oil marketing companies who I do see in front of us here came into State House seeking the intervention of the President in seeking to solicit for dollars to be able to pay for products. It is not because there were no products in Kenya. The ships had docked, the products were here, but the LCs could not be unwound because the dollars were not available. And what we thought was to look at friendly countries who could support us on G2G and give us products.
That right there, Sam.
Right. Okay. What just happened? All right. That's a very interesting voice of the Cabinet Secretary because, again, remember that he's the initiator of all this entire process. But now he says that when they came into government, even before they were sworn in, remember he was sworn in as the Cabinet Secretary on the 27th of October to be the Cabinet Secretary in charge of that docket. But for him to say that some of the OMCs came to State House seeking to solicit for dollars because they were facing a crisis. Yeah. I have many questions more than answers because I'm just wondering, seeking to solicit for dollars at State House. Dollars are available at commercial banks. If there's a challenge, you speak to the Central Bank of Kenya because you're not able to import what you need. But anyway, I don't know what that conversation was, but if it ends up with some of the OMCs now being identified to supply oil through some 3 companies that are, of course, owned by different countries, there is a lot that needs to be explained therein. But also, as to the question of will petroleum products become cheaper, when you listen even to the Director General of IPRA, you get to understand that he is saying that the price of oil is determined by an international system. I think the name is Platt. Yeah. So there's nothing you can do about that because it's already predetermined. If wherever you are, the price of oil is known. It is a global commodity. But if, and I say if, that the Kenya shilling appreciates against the dollar, then it's going to be good news for the country because then again, you will not need a lot of Kenya shilling to be converted into dollars, therefore depleting the worth of the economy to be in a position to pay for those petroleum products, and especially given that already we have a grace period of 6 months. But there are certain questions that need to be ironed out, and of course we'll be waiting to see the direction that the Justice Hedwig Ongudi court takes, because I know there is some highlighting of submissions on the 30th of April and to see how this case would progress. But of course, she's been very considerate because there were some applications to suspend that deal, to give a court injunction, but that wasn't done, and her argument was, if that is done, then it's going to affect the supply of oil in this country, at least for the month of April. But these are matters that really will have to be looked into, knowing that the Public Procurement and Assets Disposal Act does not provide for oversighting a government-to-government deal. That is first. Then secondly, the Public Procurement and Assets Disposal Act really talks about procurement of public goods. This procurement of oil is not a public good.
Right.
Even if it's a government-to-government deal, it is not a public product.
Absolutely. And the other thing to note about what highly affects the cost of fuel in this country is the taxes that we ourselves have imposed on it. 9 taxes, to be specific. And so there's always been the talk that if you want to reduce the cost of fuel, you'd want to work on those 9 taxes. That's an area where you have a, some measure of control. The international prices notwithstanding, the 9 taxes is where our government has control to decide, whether there is anything they can vary around that. But I just wanted to pick up on, what you talked about, regulating these so-called government-to-government deals, right? So this one is, not subjected to the Act. That means scrutiny, questions of accountability with respect to, these deals. How were the organizations identified? Was it a competitive process? What was the price? Are we getting value for money? Which are the things that the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act takes a look at? Like, did we get the right price for the goods? But, we've had experience with government-to-government deals in this country. In 2013, that was the first election, that we're doing with the BVR kits. Some interesting things happened. So we first had the open tender for these BVR kits. It was an open tender. It was competitive. You had all of these bids. And that process was started, I think, in February 2012. The tender was then terminated in July of the same year. And the reasons for that were rather unclear. So we're not told why they suspended the process. But as you can imagine, the time was getting closer and closer to the election. And the BVR kits were required for registration of voters even before you get to the election. So you have a point where crisis, time is up. And then what happens? There is a conversation to have a government-to-government deal to procure the BVR kits. So we're looking for 15,000 kits at the time. And in fact, the reason for the government-to-government deal was time constraints. After the first competitive open tendering process, was terminated for whatever reason. And in fact, what we said was that government-to-government deal would not affect the IEBC budget. So the money would not be coming from them. This would be, it would be great for the IEBC that we know always has constraints, especially during this time. Long story short, we know the company that got this. But the Office of the Auditor General then took a look at this deal and found that, in fact, we paid more for the BVR kits than we would indeed have budgeted for. I think we're going to purchase them for 6.2 billion shillings. But through the government-to-government deal, we ended up paying 32% more than we would have paid in an open tendering system. Also, there was questions about how that company was selected, which countries were at the table and giving this suggestion of a government-to-government deal, and then voila, they happen to be the same government, that is nominated to be part of the government-to-government deal. But at least with respect to the BVR kits in 2013 through a government-to-government deal, we didn't quite get value for money. We, in fact, spent more. And remember, that's usually the justification for a government-to-government deal, that it's, it's cheaper, you can decide the price. So at least with respect to the BVR kits in 2013, the government-to-government deal hasn't always given us value for money, hasn't always been open to scrutiny and accountability. And so, we hope that this won't go the same way, as that one did. So,
you're right. I mean, when you talk of government to government, the first thing that suffers is transparency. It means there'll be a lot that then will be hidden in the pages.
Because do we go and ask the UAE?
No, you can't ask.
Yeah.
Or do we ask Saudi Arabia?
As who?
As who?
Yeah.
They're a sovereign state, and you can't start questioning them about certain deals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And look at a very simple scenario here. Government has its own oil corporation called the National Oil Corporation. Which one would have imagined at a very Monanchi level that if you have the National Oil Corporation, NOC, then NOC actually exists for days like this. That, we have a crisis with the private route of getting oil, and here is the public one that can actually go out there and then, on behalf of the government and the people of Kenya, will procure the oil necessary for our use. But an argument has been made about the financial situation of national oil. It owes, I think, about 8 billion plus shillings. And so the argument is it's not able to raise the LC. And it just paints that picture of something dark, a space where accountability will be limited. Again, I go back to what I keep referring to as our ways of doing things and the way we've done things for the last 10 years. Whether you're talking of counties or national government, how do we do our tendering? Is it really above board? Whether it's about pens, it's little stationery in government offices, are they above board? Or are they normally done in a way that, somebody who made a call and who knows somebody will then get the tender? If in small things we can't do it right, why should we be free of suspicions when it comes to big moments like this, where 8 vessels a month of oil are concerned?
And the first consignment has arrived, as we had said. 2 ships, ferrying 165,000 metric tons at the Kipevu Oil Terminal in Mombasa. It includes petrol, diesel, and jet A1 fuel. And so that's the thing. This is now the first of how we're going to be procuring this oil from private companies on credit, which will be payable in 6 months. And the consignment contains the 80,000 metric tons of jet A1 fuel worth 10 billion shillings and 85,000 metric tons of petrol also worth 10 billion shillings. So now with Kenyans are going to wait for the fuel prices by April, which are going to be reviewed due this Friday.
Yes.
And really see if, we're curious.
Right,
There'll be no change probably, but we're curious.
Yeah, but not for this Friday. We'll wait to see what happens at the
next month.
The next cycle, which is now 15th of the next
April.
month. May.
May 15th
yes,
of
that's
April.
right. That's the one.
Yeah.
Sam, you get the final word.
But there's we need to remain hopeful.
Yeah.
And I think we need to listen to the Deputy President saying that finally we are finding a solution to the very expensive fuel that we've been buying.
So fuel. That strategy of fuel subsidy is foolish because it's not sustainable. With what has happened, freeing $500 million to purchase fuel every month, the demand for the dollar will come down and the shilling will gain. This is a practical way of dealing with the high cost of fuel and other products in the country.
Right, so we have to wait. We have to be patient. There is an element that there are good intentions, at least to save the economy. The process may be questionable, but there are good intentions, and you have to wait and see how that pans out, especially because in your bills, even in electricity, there's always a forex charge.
Yeah.
So if that sort of settles, it might be good news for the country.
And a fuel cost charge as well. So,
That's true.
yeah. Okay, hopeful.
Yeah, hope is a good thing.
Hope. Jamila?
Final words?
Yeah.
Leo acha nianze.
Leo Nanza.
Mimi naanza.
Haya, sawa.